Okay, I've just started the recording, and I'll just say for people who can see me, the reason that this is not attached is because one of my headphones is fucked. This side is fucked, so I'll have the voice cutting in and out. So for everyone who's gonna shit on me for having this like not set up properly, you can't see, so it's fine for you. Um, yeah. So sorry, was there another thing you wanted to talk about at the outset, or no?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. Well, I have a few things to say at the outset. So I just have some notes written down, so it'll sound like I'm reading. That's why. So, a few things. Okay, so firstly, I would like to start with a fresh slate. You've had some frustrating interactions with vegans. I've probably said things that annoy you, depending how much of my stuff you've read. You've said some things that annoy me, but that's nothing out of the ordinary, and I think we can set that aside in order to have a productive conversation. I assume you agree with
Yeah,
that.
I agree.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. The next one is I do not know how to pronounce your channel name. Like, should I just call you Emanuela? Should I call you, is it like Zemist, like Xenon, or like I don't know. What do I call you?
Oh boy, you could just call me, I guess, freaking Snitch or Scientifics or something like that.
Okay,
I've had a lot of names in the past just because I bounce between different channels.
sure. I'll use Snitch because it's quick, but it sounds kind of like I'm shit talking you. But okay. Okay. So then the other thing is, I guess, is more for people who listen. So Snitch is fed up with discussing the ethics, at least currently. So to the extent that we talk about ethical positions, we're going to be discussing things like whether they're contradictory. We're not actually going to be discussing what the right ethical position is. So I mean, I think that's pretty self explanatory. Talking about the logical features of a position is different than being like, this is the right position, that's the wrong position. This position leads to this. Do you accept this kind of consequence? I'm sure that's fine also.
Yes.
Okay. Two more. Okay, so it would also be good to discuss ethics at some point, though not today. So, just for the record, we can do that sometime if you want to. And
Yeah.
then the other one is just because there's a bit of tension in the air. So I don't think Snitch is an idiot. This is more for the audience than for you. I actually think, based on my limited exposure to your content, that you're probably smart. I do think you've said some very wrong things, but I suspect that this is due to overstepping the bounds of your field into philosophical territory without realizing it, which is something that's easy to do and forgivable, and which philosophers do in the opposite direction sometimes. So, not due to incompetence in your actual area of training. So, that's just something that I wanted to kind of flag at the outset.
And I would also like to mention that whenever I bring up sentience or consciousness, I know that sometimes I bring up papers that they appear to contradict each other. For example, there was one mycelium one that was talking about like the consciousness of mycelium. If you read into the paper, it's really talking about just, and I say this loosely, the biological definition of a sentient cell. Um, and I base that off of stuff that I've known through science to be repeatable over and over again. So I'm not talking about philosophically like how we see it, if that makes sense.
It sounds like you're trying to say that you've said things about sentience, which actually isn't one of the things I have on my list to talk about. But it sounds like you're saying you've said things about that which seem contradictory, but actually, given some time, you'd be able to like reconcile them and show that they're not. Is that the general idea?
Yeah, it's mainly like wording in different papers that I've cited and stuff like that, where it says it in the title, but if you read the actual paper, it goes along with what I was talking about.
Sure. Okay. All right. That's fair. Um, okay. So then what I actually wanted to talk about. So there's like two main things. And then if we happen to get through them quickly, there's like two others. But yeah, so the main things that I want to talk about are I want us to reach agreement on what a contradiction actually is. And then I want to go over things that you've called contradictions, which I think once we have an understanding of what a contradiction is,
I'm
you will.
sorry.
Pardon me?
Oh, you just cut out for a quick second. What did
Oh,
you say there?
that's fine. So there's two main things that I want to talk about. So the first is I want to see if we can get to agreement on what a contradiction actually is. I think we can do this. We can talk about just the standard way it's talked about in logic. I can show you how truth tables sort of work. And then once we have a shared understanding of what a contradiction is, with that sort of more robust clear understanding, I want us to just look at these statements where you've called things contradictions. And I suspect that you'll agree once you have sort of the notion that logicians actually use when they're talking about a contradiction. I think once you actually have that notion in your head, you'll probably agree that these things are not contradictions, even if you have other problems with them or you think that there is a contradiction, but it just wasn't expressed perfectly. So, those two things basically clearing up what a contradiction is, trying to agree on that, and then talking about whether these things that you've called contradictions in your discussion with Richard, this is all from the first 30 minutes of your second conversation with him, whether they actually are contradictions. So is that okay for you?
To bring up the fact that I, the main contradiction that I believe to be a contradiction, which I probably did not word very well because I was freaking, I don't know, I was not conversing the right way. Because there was a lot of things I do acknowledge that were not necessarily contradictions, at least from his point of logic. Um, One of those being when he was talking about, I believe, in the conversation, that specific conversation that we had, where because I believe that he said that he believes murder is bad, so it's justified. Um, the reason why I believe it would be a contradiction, or at least this is from my other conversations with people, when I say that it's a contradiction to say that murdering the murderer is a contradiction, because then when I asked them, or I followed up by saying, would you be okay with raping the rapist? They basically disagreed and said, no, I wouldn't be. And that's where I saw there to be a contradiction.
Okay, well, I think there may be things to object to about a position like that, but I'm not sure that it's a contradiction. So I have like actual exact quotes that we can talk about, so we don't need to like do any like what did I actually say kind of stuff. I figured I don't bring quotes to like snipe someone like here's all your things, let's like fucking destroy you on every point. But I do. I mean, I guess on some level it's that these are specific things that I think are wrong, and I want to talk about these exact things. But that's not really like the like emotional like attitude behind it. It's more just that I know when you don't have the actual timestamps, then there tends to be disagreement about what was actually said, and that can just be painful. So, yeah. Okay, let's just talk about what a contradiction actually is and see if we can agree about this. So, in informal logic, in which philosophy students take or like some computer scientists will take. Have you ever taken like a formal logic course? I'm assuming not. You're in like bio or chem or something, right?
Yeah, I used to major in biology. Now I'm in kinesiology, and I do like some. I dabble in a little bit of microbiology and rat studies because that's the labs I'm in.
I see. Yeah, so I mean, this is not something that like, oh, you don't know what the fuck a like. I mean, most people are not gonna, even educated people who have PhDs, are just not gonna know stuff like this because logic hasn't been part of their stream, right? In the same way that you could ask me fairly basic things about biology, and I'm gonna just completely flunk because I'm a computer science and philosophy student. I don't do any biology. I did like grade 12 bio, or maybe I didn't even. Did I just do grade 11? I don't remember, but you get the point, right? So I'm not ripping on you for, if you don't know this kind of stuff. But the way that a contradiction is talked about in logic is when you have some proposition in conjunction with its negation. So that's going to be a statement that has this kind of structure. The sky is blue and the sky is not blue. I'm talking to Snitch right now, and I'm not talking to Snitch right now. I'm sitting in a chair right now, and I'm not sitting in a chair right now. You see how,
Gotcha.
yeah, and you
Yeah, I see.
can, yeah, and I'll actually, because you like you're kind of into STEM, you might actually like the way this works with logic. So I'm gonna share my screen here because it's kind of mathy and it's interesting. It's one of those areas of philosophy that's like a bit less like sort of like language and stuff. It's more like it's more mathy. So yeah, I'll just bring up a truth table generator here. Maybe I can flip over to a new screen and I can put that here. You can see this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so with logic, basically, you understand what a proposition is,
Yes.
and I should flip my screen here so people can see this. Now that is not the right screen. Why is that happening? Just let me fix this for people who are watching here. Okay, there we go. People who will be watching, sorry, no one's watching right now. Okay, yeah, so a proposition is, I guess you said you know what it is, but again, like the technical way of thinking about it, it's a truth apt statement. So it's like a sentence that's capable of having a truth value. So again,
Yeah.
something like, yeah, like I have hands, or like you've studied STEM subjects. Like these are propositions. A question like how are you doing today? That's not something that can be true or false, right? It's not a proposition. A noun like, couch, that's not a proposition. Yeah, you follow me, yeah?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So basically the quick version, we're not going to literally go through like all of how logic works. We're just going to get a basic idea of what a contradiction is formally. Beyond just what I've already said. So you can represent a proposition with a variable, just like in math, how you have numerical variables like x, which could stand in for any number. You might solve for x, right? I'm sure you have plenty of experience with stuff like this. In
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. In logic, you have propositional variables, and you have more complicated logics that do other stuff. We're just going to talk about propositional logic. So you might have a proposition that's represented with the variable p in this case, right? This could be any arbitrary proposition, like the sky is blue, or I'm sitting in a chair right now. Just like x could be any arbitrary number, right? And I'm just gonna check that you're following me. I assume you are, but I just don't want to talk a bunch and then like you lost me somewhere along the way. Does that all make sense?
Yep, that all makes sense.
Yeah, so then you can generate these truth tables for propositions, basically. So I've just put in P here, I've generated the truth table. And basically, what you have here on the left hand side, you have all the values, the truth values that P can take on, which is pretty simple here. It can be true or false. It's pretty basic, right? And then on the other side, you have the expression in here, the truth values it has. Now, right now, the variables involved in the expression and the expression are the same thing, so the table is pretty basic, but we can make it a little different, right? So let's look at the truth table for not P. This symbol just means negation. It's like putting a not in front of a proposition. So you see here how P can be either true or false. I'll just make the table more basic, sorry. P can be either true or false, and not P has values based on those values of P, right? So when P is true, not P is false. When P is false, not P is true. Makes sense, right?
Yes, makes sense.
Yeah, if I'm sitting here right now as true, I'm not sitting here right now as false. It's pretty basic. And you can, have something like conjunction. So that's like basically and in natural language. So I'll do P and Q. And, same kind of thing here. Table got a bit bigger, but you can see in the variables column here, we have P and we have Q. And we have all possible combinations. Have you ever done like combinations and stuff in math where it's like you have variables and there's like there's like a finite amount of possible combinations for the values those variables can take on?
So this is kind of more like, I guess, for me, or at least this is just how I'm understanding it. This looks more like a Punnett square for recessive lethal genes. That's what it looks like to me,
So
where the recessive lethal would be truth while everything else would be false.
yeah, I couldn't speak to that. It could be that that's a perfectly good analogy. I just don't know about Punnett squares. Again, I assume that's like pretty basic in your neck of the woods, but it's not something I know about personally. But you
Understood.
you
Yeah,
can you can see what's
that
going.
makes sense.
Yeah, like you get the idea though. It's like there's only so many values, right? It's like say you have two light switches and they can be on or off, right? It's like both on, one on then the other off, the first on and the other off, or both off, right? Same kind of thing. It's like they can both be true, one true, the other false, one false, the other true, or both false. And then you have this expression over here, P and Q, and you can see that its truth value is a function of the truth values of the variables that are contained in this expression, right? So when P and Q are both true, this expression, P and Q, is true. And it's false in all these other cases, right? If P is true and Q is false, well, then P and Q is false. If P is false and Q is true, P and Q is still false, right? It's P and Q. They have to both be true. And if they're both false, it's false. So, we're not going to go like way into this, but I'm just going to show what a contradiction means. Okay, so like in a formal sense, what a contradiction is. So if I do something like P and not P, right, which is the same kind of structure as those sentences we were talking about, like I'm in a chair right now and I'm not in a chair right now, right? Same proposition and not that same proposition, right? If I generate the truth table for that, you can see it's false in every column, right? There is no case where it turns out being true. It's just always false that P and not P. So in this basic kind of propositional logic, a contradiction is just going to it's going to be a statement where it's false for all possible assignments of for all possible truth value assignments that the variables in it could have. Does that make sense?
Yes, makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's enough of the like logic stuff for now. So I'm gonna close my screen share. But yeah, so I do think it would have been good if Richard went through that with you, because then I think you guys could have maybe like gotten on the same page about like what we actually mean by contradiction. It would have been maybe easier to discuss some of these things. But I'm kind of expecting that now with that notion in mind, you probably are not going to really fight me on these. Like if we look at a sentence like here's some examples from like 327. The fact that last time you said you would be okay with killing a bear, like that's not a logical contradiction, right?
What do you mean by that?
I mean that sentence, like so these are all every timestamp I have here is you responding to him asking what the contradiction is. Now, and I'll also just say, to be fair to you, maybe there is some contradiction in his view and it just wasn't expressed correctly, right? So if you grant that you've said things here are contradictions, which in fact aren't once we get a more robust notion of contradiction in mind, that doesn't mean there's not a contradiction in his position and that you have some sense of what it is and maybe you could express it with effort. I'm just trying to get us to agree that these things aren't contradictions. So to answer you,
Oh
when I
yeah,
say,
no. That's,
yeah, and it's just because it doesn't
yeah,
have
no,
the right
you're
sentence
100%
structure,
right.
right? It's not a
Yeah,
case.
no, it's not the right sentence.
Yeah, and that's going to hold for all of these, right? And if you agree on that, I'll read some more of these. But if you agree on that, then I think that this phase of the conversation is like basically done, and when we agree. So some other examples are like the fact that you want to solve murder with murder, like that's not a logical contradiction. You want to preserve sentient life, but you want to murder sentient life. Again, like these just aren't sentences that have that structure, P and not P. You want to murder the murderer. There's one actually that's pretty close to a contradiction here, but like so far the ones I've read, you agree these aren't technically speaking logical contradictions, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
technically speaking, they are not contradictions.
Now this
Also, it should be noted that like half the time that I was trying to express what the contradiction was, he would cut me off like halfway through the sentence. So it was a little difficult to get my point across, and I'm not very good with English. We can say it like that. I had to go to quite literally grammar school because I started learning another language with like English, and it was just not fun. But yeah, overall, those are all not contradictions.
I
Logically
yeah,
speaking.
I see. Okay. Your English sounds completely fine. Someone else said that you weren't a native English speaker, which actually surprised me. So you can take that as a compliment. This one
I really
actually,
appreciate it.
yeah, no problem. This one actually gets close to being a contradiction. So one that you said here is you cannot be against murder but also in favor of murder at the same time. That is pretty close to you are against murder and you are not against murder, which would be a logical contradiction. But again, it's like not quite phrased right. And I'll just like speed run the others here because I don't think we disagree about this. You are creating a perpetual cycle of violence. Murder to stop murder is a contradiction. The fact that you're saying you're agnostic to free will, the fact that you quite literally are saying that you want to murder another sentient being for not having free will. You said you're agnostic to free will and simultaneously believe there is right and wrong. You believe you're agnostic to free will. Now, there might be things to talk about there, about how those positions work and if his view makes sense and whatnot. But again, and this is the last time I'll say this because those are all the quotes I have, we agree these things are not logical contradictions.
No, I 100% agree.
Okay, cool. There are other things I want to talk about, but if there's anything you want to say about sort of what we've discussed so far, you're free to.
I mean, that the one that got close to the logical contradiction is kind of what I was trying to get at. Was like there was times in the first uh discussion that I had with Richard where he would say, "Oh, I'm for sentient life being alive, and I'm against murder." but then in the next sentence you'd say, but I'll kill a bear like right after it's born, and I'll be okay with killing this sentient organism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I just didn't know how to word that sentence. So I mean, if it's possible to like help me learn how to word it the right way, because that would be great.
Yeah, totally. Well, so I think that I do see what you think the contradiction is there. And I think the thing that you're envisioning, which I'll describe in a second, I think it is a contradiction, but I also don't think it's what Richard believes. Whether that's down to your interpretation of him, his phrasing of it, that's like a whole other question. I don't want to do the like who's to blame kind of thing. I don't think that's very productive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if what you're thinking is like some kind of sentence that has a shape, again, the contradiction shapes can get a bit more complex. I was kind of doing the basic stuff, but if it has a shape that's like, for all x, if x is sentient, then it's wrong to kill x, and there exists an x such that x is sentient and it's fine to kill x, that would, of course, be a logical contradiction. Is that the kind of thing you're getting at?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting.
Now, I don't think he believes that. I think that he believes the second half, that there are sentient things that it's okay to kill, but I think he's just going to reject that first half. So he's not going to let you build the whole contradiction there. He's going to say, no, I'm not committed to that first part. Um, now, I don't want to do a whole, like, we don't have to go into all the, like, what Richard would say, but I think that my basic take there is that I understand the thing that you think is a contradiction, and if that were his view, it would absolutely be a contradiction. I don't think it's his view, and I'm also not assigning blame for whose fault it is that there is a miscommunication there. Is that all agreeable enough?
Yeah, agreeable enough.
Okay. Anything else before I hop to these other two sort of things?
Oh, go ahead, hop right into it.
Yeah, okay. It's funny. Whenever I write down points to reach, time permitting, I rarely get to them. So this is nice to actually get to them. So yeah, I guess there's two of them here. So actually, I'll start with the last one first because it's a little bit easier. The first one's kind of complicated. So you've said that vegans say that you hold evil views, and I actually I suspect that some amount of vegans have said that, but I just want to point out a bit more of a defensible way that a vegan might say this, and that I suspect some of the sort of smarter vegans you talk to, I think you talked to Nick, or you might have talked to Aputa. Those guys are pretty smart, and I think that they would say it like this if you gave them the opportunity. I didn't actually listen to that conversation, but you might say something that has a logical entailment that's evil. That means when you apply these right logical relations to it, you can deduce another thing from it, and that thing you deduce is like insanely evil. Now, you might not be aware, and you as general here, not you specifically, one might not be aware of the entailments of their view. And in fact, becoming aware of the entailments of one's view and noticing that they are wrong or evil or something might push someone off of view. But I guess the point I'm making here is that when a vegan says your view is evil, what would actually be better for them to say is that your view has an evil entailment. Because the whole idea is, when a vegan says, like, okay, what do you think makes the moral difference? And then the person goes, oh, intelligence. And they go, okay, well, like, so you have the view that it's fine to kill disabled people if they're less smart than an animal, right? The whole idea is like they don't actually hold that view. They're going to think that's evil, but it's entailed by the thing they said. So it's going to show a problem in their position. So yeah, the idea here is that it would be better phrased as your view has an evil entailment. And given that phrasing, this might actually be true of any of us at any time. It's totally possible your view has some like horrible entailment.
Sense?
Okay. Um, all right. I was expecting more of a fight, but maybe we just agree on all this. Okay, one last thing.
I mean,
Sorry?
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I would prefer not to be called some very interesting Austrian artist. I would really prefer not to be called that and then follow that by a bunch of curse words. It's not like there's ways to talk to people where you're not like insulting them. Like if somebody were to say like, "Hey, the view that you have could be taken as like logically like as you said, like in what was it again?
Entailing,
I'm sorry.
entailing.
Entailing evil. Yeah. Like honestly, any viewpoint could be turned into that. Like even for, I guess, I mean, I could go into it after you say your second point or the second point, and because I did have a couple notes that I would want to go in the again. Oh my dear Lord, I'm sorry.
It's
Go
okay.
into but yeah, I'll talk about it afterwards. But there is every single logical like or every I guess mindset or opinion that somebody has on ethics and morals can be put into an evil stance. It's not like it's not impossible to I guess put some sort of moral into a situation where it looks evil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't actually think every position has evil entailments. Like, I mean, say that you have some agent whose only belief is like that a lamp exists or something. It's like it's going to be very hard to tease out some like horrible entailment from, that particular proposition. Um, but yeah, I do think that there's positions that can seem on their surface totally reasonable. But then when you tease out the things that are entailed by them, it's like, holy fuck, like, what? So positions can be deceptive like that. They can have horrible entailments. Um, but
Well, I
yeah,
mean, like especially, like the consumption of like various living organisms, for example, whether you're talking about a plant or an animal, there's ways you can twist that into something that looks evil on the surface. It doesn't really matter. Like if I said on some foreign planet where these plant-like people they conducted signals through their veins that I guess it shows like a pain like response, like a bivalve, but we don't really define that as sentience. So you'd be okay with eating them? I mean, most people would say no. But if you define things by, like, for example, what I was talking about with Nick, by what vegans talk about for sentience, then yeah, it would be considered evil. But even for me, like, I eat plants and animals, so I mean, it still would be evil. So it's like, there's ways to twist certain moral beliefs that regardless are going to look evil.
well, okay, so I'm going to avoid the impulse to actually reply on the ethics, but I'll just talk about entailment versus twisting. I think that to use the word twist suggests that
Or not
in
twist,
some
I'm
way,
sorry.
well, I mean, I just want to make the difference clear. You can tell me if you disagree, but like twist is sort of suggesting that you're making it sound like they believe something that they actually don't. Like you're manipulating, you're twisting, you're contorting, right? You're changing what the thing you're talking about has been changed from what they actually believe. That's a lot different than teasing out a logical entailment. A logical entailment,
Then
they sorry?
teasing out a logical entailment, not twisting. Said the
Yeah.
wrong word.
Yeah, no, totally. Okay. Yeah, and I don't think that that's the case for all positions. I mean, it might be. I mean, again, what seems evil is actually going to vary per individual. But, I think that, again, without actually getting into a whole debate about the ethics, I think that there are positions that one can take that really do not seem to have any particularly evil entailments, at least to like, a sort of cognitively normal human. So I do think it's an achievable task. I just think when someone takes their first steps into philosophy and gets like like struck with like 50 different insane reductios, it might, which a reductio is supposed to be like a bad entailment teased out of a position. um it can seem like holy fuck, you can do this with anything, but actually I think there's an art there, and that if you develop competence with philosophy, you can really reach a point where you don't hold views that have evil entailments, at least not nearly as often, and that you become very good at diffusing um, situations one might tease out that make it look like there's something bad about your view when in fact there isn't. So I'm just flagging that I don't think every view is actually something that has something evil to it or that can be made to look evil. I think there's defensible positions. It just takes time and skill and training to be able to defend those well and to find them in the first place.
I also believe that evil and good and evil are all very subjective. So, like, for example, to me and my mentor and my team of the team of microbiologists that I've worked with in the past,
Mm-hmm.
um, they all agree with my points on like pain and biology. Of course, if I talk to just the regular everyday Joe, like even with Richard, when I asked him uh how neurons conduct pain, he didn't know. So it's like it really depends on who you're talking to and what they subjectively believe.
What depends on who you're talking to and what they believe, whether they perceive something as evil, whether they think something is right or
Yeah,
wrong. Yeah, well,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, you're actually. I mean, like I'm a moral anti-realist. So is Richard. So is Nick. Like you've stumbled into the big like anti-realist vegan sphere. We're actually probably a minority. I think of the vegan community. Actually, I don't know if that's true, but I guess a lot of vegans don't take an explicit view on that kind of meta-ethical question, and I think that you'll probably find a lot of vegans who are like moral realists who will start talking about quote like objective right and wrong. But yeah, like my kind of view, like the like basic kind of idea is just like I think that statements about what's right and wrong are just expressions of our preferences. I don't think that there's some like higher frame that says, you know, if you and I have a disagreement about morality and you go like, you know, not holding the door for the old lady is wrong. And I go, no, not holding the door for the old lady is right. I don't think there's some like higher perspective that reconciles that or something. I just think that we have different preferences. We might be able to motivate each other to change preferences through discussion, but I don't think there's like some kind of objective moral framework that like dictates who's correct or something like that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Um, okay. I can go to the other point. I don't know if you have, unless you have anything else on any of this stuff.
Go
Okay. Yeah, so this is the last one. So, yeah, this is just well, I guess I'll just say the point. So, what I have written here is someone else's point is not falsified if you say some term they used is correctly defined in a given way, then reinterpret their sentence given this new term meaning, which they have not assented to, and show that under the reinterpretation it contains an error. So this is a bit more like complicated than the other points, but you know, the basic idea is like say that you say, you know, the sky is blue or something, and then, you know, I try to show that there is some like correct definition of sky. We can talk about what it would mean for a definition to be correct. I think that's a confusing idea. But then if I reinterpret you where sky actually means something that you didn't intend, and then under my reinterpretation the statement is false, I'm not showing that you've made an error, right? I'm not showing that anything is wrong with you because I've taken an interpretation that no longer corresponds to what you actually believe. Does that make sense, or is that kind of like is that like a lot?
That's a lot. Could you? I'm so sorry. I'm really bad with like all of the really fine details of English. So please I guess specify.
That's okay. An example might be helpful. So the kind of thing that made me say this was um, I forget the exact flow of dialogue, and I don't have a timestamp for this, but I think it happened around sentience when you were talking to Richard, and I think it happened around murder, where he would say that this particular thing is not sentient, or he would say that this is not murder, or something like that. This is going to be rough, okay? It's not going to be perfect quoting here. And then you would say, well, the objective definition of sentience is so and so, or the objective definition of murder is so and so. And under this definition, that is murder, or that is a sentient being, right? So you're committed to, you know, valuing this like C elegant. Is that what it's called? The C elegant?
C elegans.
Elegans. C elegans. Yeah. So
Yes.
yeah. So I guess there's a few kind of things about that, but you see how you're using the term sentience in a different way than he's using it, right? We can talk about who's correct about the definition in a second, but if we have the same sentence, a C. elegans is sentient. That's the sentence, let's say, okay? If we interpret that same sentence in two different ways, where the thing that is different between the two interpretations is how we mean the term sentience, it could be that it's true on one interpretation and false on the other, right? So maybe we'll call your definition, because it's like a biology kind of thing, we'll call that like, sentience B, and we'll call his like sentience P for like philosophical definition, okay? So if you have a sentence like a C. elegans is sentient, if we have two different interpretations, a C. elegans is sentient B and a C. elegans is sentient P, that
I
sentence,
understand.
yeah, it's going to be false under one interpretation and true under the other, right?
On the same, yeah, so it's either or. And
Yeah.
that's also kind of, yeah, I understand that. And after talking to Nick, I recall you said you didn't listen to the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's just for patrons right now. I probably will listen to it, but not yet.
Yeah, so after talking to Nick, I kind of realized that more than likely it's just like it's a different definition. Um, I remember seeing like a couple people in like different chats like saying, "Oh yeah, I'm a biologist and I think that it's this." Like everybody has a different definition to an extent. Like definitions are subjective, like they just are. Especially some of them, they really are. But um if you want, I can walk you through why I define sentience as such.
Well, we can do that after if you want to. I'm happy to hear your reasoning for using that term, but I kind of want to clarify still this main point here, if that's okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the problem is if we have this same sentence and it's false under one interpretation and true under the other, if Richard is using sentience, if he's talking about sentience P, for you to say, "Hey, well, that sentence you just said is false," but when you say that really you're using sentience B, you're not actually showing that he said something false there. Does that make sense? Or do you disagree? Do you
Yeah, that
agree?
makes sense. No, I agree.
Right. Okay. And then there's just one more element to this, which it sounds like you might agree with because you just said definitions are subjective. Sometimes people try to do this thing where they say, I have the correct definition or I have the objective definition. Now, I think that that's kind of weird because it's not just like with the moral thing, right? Like I'm also going to be an anti-realist about like linguistics basically. Like, there's not some like higher like god framework that like ascribes this special property of correctness to certain like it doesn't work like that. It's just that, and I'm not trying to say you believe that. It's just that there are terms and there are humans who use terms, and there might be certain communities that use a different term than another, but there's not some kind of higher framework that like blesses particular terms with like correctness or something like that. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. In fact, that's kind of why I wanted I I realized that it was almost pointless to have a lot of these conversations, and I'm not saying that this conversation is pointless. I actually learned quite a bit. But
Sure.
like I especially learned this, and I'm not saying that the conversation was pointless because it was a decent conversation. It helped me learn more about the vegan community. But the
Sorry,
conversation
which
that
are
I
you
had with
talking about? Oh, you're saying, sorry.
yeah, the conversation with Nick, I realized that it's a different perception of how we see the world. And it's not right or wrong because there is technically no like firm definition of that. There's not some higher power like saying, "Hey, this is right and wrong."
Hmm.
Um it just depends on who you are. So it's not it's yeah. So yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, and I think that this is actually, I partly say this because you can actually use it to your advantage in conversation. So it's like this is like a very common thing that people do before exposure to philosophy. They get in arguments and then they notice a term is being used differently, and then they start arguing about who's using the term correctly. The right move to make there is just to say, well, look, I am using it in this particular way, and under this interpretation, what I said is true, right? Now, the other person can also do this as well, but that's sort of the way you resolve it. Like, if anyone ever tries to sort of strong arm you into, like, no, you must use a term in this way, you can just be like, well, I'm using it in this way, and on my meaning, I don't think that what I'm saying is wrong. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I don't have anything else. I mean, obviously, we could have a whole conversation about ethics, but we kind of said we don't want to do that right now. So I don't. I mean, we can do that sometime if you want to. but it might be good to end on a good note because the ethics conversation can tend to get heated and involve aliens and Hitler and stuff. And it sounds like you're a bit fed up with that currently. But I don't know. Is there anything else
Yeah.
that you want to say before we kind of call an end to this?
So just kind of to give like an idea of where I'm coming from with the whole sentient thing.
Sure.
Um, I've I've got a couple notes here. So objectively, if you know it, I'm not sure how much you know about biology, but how in from what you know is a feeling or pain response or really any response towards the environment transmitted from outside environmental stimuli. So for example, touching a mug, getting cut by a razor blade or something. How is this environmental stimuli transmitted to the organism? And like I'm talking about organisms on Earth with like double-stranded DNA, but how exactly is that occurring?
Well, before trying to answer that, I think I need to understand what the question is asking. And if you're asking something about like, biology, I probably won't know. But when you say transmitted to the organism, are you talking about how does it get into their subjective experience?
Talking about more like chemically, if you know about like how stimuli is basically translated from the outside environment to your cells.
Translated to your cells? No, that's not something I know about.
Okay, so what everybody learns in biology, at least on the basic level, especially like literally first year biology class, is like the depolarization of tissues. And it's just sodium going inside of the cell, or it's like sodium and potassium being exchanged between the cell wall, which causes depolarization. And that's like the basis of the signal. So, like, for example, a pain response is a specific protein or a specific enzyme, or sorry, not specific protein or receptor that's being triggered, and that sends like depolarization through tissues, usually nervous tissue, to the organism, where the organism perceives it as, hey, it's hurting me, I should probably move. Um, and this is why people who don't have this pain response, they tend to get hurt very easily. And have you ever heard of like those sorts of disorders?
I've heard of people who have different pain responses, but I have to ask something about what you just said before you continue. You just talked about it being perceived by the organism. So when you say something like how does a pain response go from like you touch a mug or something like that, how does that get transmitted to the organism? You're talking about how does it go from there into being in their perception?
So perception itself is all chemistry. Like if you, for example, this I know this sounds like a very gory example,
Well, wait,
but if
sorry.
you
Can
take
I just cut
two,
in to make sure I'm understanding you, if that's okay?
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. When you say perception is all chemistry, that we can talk about that because there's that's a thing that it gets philosophical. But even if that is the case, when you're talking about pain being transmitted like from whatever the moment of contact or the location of contact on your skin or something to the organism, right? You're talking about it making its way into their perception, even if perception is just a chemical thing, right?
I'm talking about the literal chemical signaling. I'm like at least in response to some sort of stimulation. So if all that an organism was a pain receptor protein, a nociceptor, and it was a neuron connected to that, and then some part, like let's say a small portion of the brain, on the very basic level, a feeling, a response to something is that signal being sent from that environmental stimuli. Is that something we could agree on?
Well, I mean, I don't. The thing is, it sounds like you're taking a physicalist view. So there's like disagreement about stuff like this in philosophy because you want to say that all pain is some kind of chemical process, right?
Well, it could be like it is technically a chemical process because even in like mental pain, it's still lighting up your brain. It's still sending signals throughout your brain. So even if it's like a mental stressor, there's still chemical reactions occurring that make it a chemical process. So there is
Well,
always a chemical base.
there's a big distinction though between saying something has a chemical basis and saying something is just a chemical process, right? Because there's like I'll tell you what the kind of views are. So like I mean I won't like go over all of them, but I'll give some basic distinction. Like there's people who are physicalists, right? They're going to say that all that exists is the physical world, however exactly we define that, and they're going to explain mental phenomena as being entirely physical, right? There's not some like separate subjective dimension of experience. It is all physical process. But there's also people who don't hold that kind of view, like non-physicalists, non-naturalists, whatever you want to call that kind of position, who are going to say that there's actually a kind of dualism, and that mental experience is not just a chemical process, right? It might be created by chemical processes. It might like correspond to chemical processes, but it's not identical to a chemical process. It is some kind of separate thing. So there's different kind
So
of views there.
So I do agree with that to an extent. There's parts of pain and parts of feeling and responses. Like I do have like a natural skepticism towards the fact that like if somebody says that there's no such thing as free will, um I have a natural skepticism to that because there's so many things that happen in humanity that I just feel like couldn't that don't make sense. At least naturally, like suicide or I'm not sure if this is going to get blurred out, but
No, it's fine.
suicide, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me as like a biologist where every organism is trying to stay alive, that us as an organism just want to die for some sort of experience that we're having mentally, which that doesn't make sense. And I'm assuming that's something that is probably being discussed in philosophy, like the definition of like actual consciousness. Even in science, it doesn't make sense completely.
Well, I mean, I think that kind of thing is actually separable from the free will discourse. But even the idea that like, I mean, we're kind of going off in the weeds now, but even the idea that you can't find like a biological or like an evolutionary kind of explanation for something like that, you can have a thing that seems like a bad behavior for an individual, but really there's some kind of linked physical feature to that behavior, which overall confers a like adaptive benefit for the creature, or for humanity generally, right? But you might have something where like this thing is beneficial and it gets selected for, but you get some variance around it where it can you might get like too much of a particular thing and that produces suicide or whatever, but the reason you're getting that behavior is actually because it's tied to something that is in some way beneficial. So like I mean I don't fucking know all about evolution and stuff, but there might even be biological explanations for this kind of stuff. Like have you ever heard the term spandrel before?
No, I actually haven't.
Oh, you ever hear like, well, what's the like biological reason? What's the evolutionary basis for music or something like this? People will speculate that music might be a spandrel, and the idea is that it's some kind of like ride along feature where it doesn't directly confer an adaptive benefit, but it's linked to something which does, right? So in order to get that other thing, you end up also getting music. So looking for like the biological basis for, or the adaptive basis for music itself is like confusion on that kind of view, because really it's just a spandrel. It's this other thing it's tied to that's actually conferring the adaptive benefit.
Yeah, I could see how that could kind of tie things up together. I mean, I always have like a little bit of skepticism where I don't think that we know everything and I don't think we ever will know everything. So, um that's why I hold the beliefs that I do. But as far as like a feeling goes, so like a physical feeling, could you agree that some, or at least the actual physical response, for example, like flinching, flinching from like a oh my, what is it called? A stovetop, like burning your hand, or like pulling your hand away, or like a reflex, is like the conduction of these signals.
Well, again, that's kind of assuming physicalism, right? When you say a physical feeling, there's people who are going to deny that feelings are physical. If you want to get into my view about physical and non-physical, or like natural and non-natural, it's going to be possibly annoying and confusing. The basic view I have is that I'm not actually convinced those terms make sense. I'm not sure that natural actually has a clear meaning. I'm not sure that physical has a clear meaning.
Okay,
But
that makes sense.
when you say stuff like
Yeah.
physical feeling, though, that's I know Richard used the term question begging, but it's basically, when you are well, just think of it like this: like you're assuming a particular view is correct while arguing for a view, right? That's an easy way to think about it. It's not perfect, obviously, for all the philosophical people who will like criticize me for saying it that way. um so if you start saying a physical feeling, that's like going to be basically begging the question against the non-physicalist who's going to say, wait, what do you mean physical feeling? I've not granted that there are physical feelings. I take a feeling to be a non-physical process.
Right.
I
So,
can
I mean,
grant you
given
something
that,
like there is a physical explanation or something. Well, even that I don't really grant because I'm not sure physical's I understand that when someone says I'm feeling pain right now, you're going to be able to tell this like causal story about like, like neurons firing or some kind. I don't actually know what it is, but I'm sure there is some kind of biological basis for that kind of stuff, right?
yeah, of what I'm getting at. I'm sorry if it seemed like question begging. I wasn't trying to do that to you. Um,
No, it's
I
okay.
was just trying to
No,
explain. I wasn't sure.
yeah, I'm not really
Oh,
criticizing you. I'm just making you aware that there's a kind of camp of people who are going to like object to what you're saying there, basically.
yeah, I understand that. And yeah, if you're in that like camp, that makes I
I'm
understand.
not. I'm in
But
the camp of not even sure that terms like physical make sense, but my view is kind of weird, so I'm kind of trying to avoid going there.
okay, I got you. So maybe we could get into that afterwards. Though just to like kind of clarify, I take a pretty physicalist approach by what you said. Um, I believe a lot of feelings and a lot of like sensations, or at least from what I've seen, is the depolarization of tissue. So sodium and potassium ions moving in and out, causing these signals, which eventually lead to feelings of like pain and a response to an environment. Um, and what I know as a fact from what scientists said, and of course it's a fact based off of physical science, um, that any organism with double-stranded DNA will have these signals, regardless whether they're a microorganism or a plant or a human or a pig or a cow. And from what I've seen is that even with like no brain and no apparent like what we believe to be sentient as like sentience, they have these noxious stimuli or painful reactions to noxious stimuli, um, or pain reactions. And that's why I kind of take by that physicalist approach because it was only a couple of years ago that we didn't even, or maybe not a couple of years ago, but maybe a couple decades ago where we didn't believe octopi or squid had sentience. We didn't believe they were smart. And then look where we are now in science, we believe they're smarter than humans in some cases. So basically, because I know that we never will know everything about science, I can't write off the fact that an organism that shares double stranded DNA with me, physical features with me, they have these depolarized tissues. I can't write off their sentience just yet. And I have to acknowledge them as living beings up until the point where we know everything about them. And I know we don't know everything about them.
When you say you can't write off their sentience, are you talking about their sentience be?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so I couldn't speak to the biology. I don't really know, but it could be that on some definition of sentience or pain or whatever that involves certain biological processes that you're going to say, well, these beings have those things. But in terms of pain as a subjective experience or having like, a first person point of view, presumably you're not convinced that, microorganisms have like a first person experience.
Well, I wouldn't know that because based off of sentience B, they have sentience. Of course, it's on a lower level from what we know now, but as I said with the octopus and the starfish, or I mentioned the starfish example, but with starfish, we didn't know for the longest time that they even felt pain, and then not too long ago, we realized that they have pain receptors. And like octopuses, like or octopi, starfish, axolotls, organisms that we didn't believe could feel pain or have, like, I guess, sentience P or the philosophical sentience,
Hmm.
but like slowly slithered their way into that. Like, I'm pretty sure most. Do you agree that octopi feel pain?
I don't know the details, but I'm under the impression that octopi feel pain. And that's just
Yeah,
because that's
and
something
they
I've
don't.
heard from reliable people. I don't know anything about the biology behind it.
Yeah, so they don't like octopi. Would you say I'm not sure if this one's not as popular, but very recently, starfish have been found to feel pain, at least in a way that humans do. Um, and from what would you, if I could send over some like resources if you want to read into it, but based off of what you believe, I'm not sure. Do you believe starfish feel pain?
I honestly have no idea. I was under the impression they're pretty basic, but it's just not something I know about. I could possibly bring someone in here who does know about these kind of things. He's a doctor, but I'm not sure if he'll get my message in time. I can bring him in if he gets it, though. I'm sure he'd be able to talk to you about which beings we have a basis for thinking feel pain or not. He'll know about all the like brain regions and whatnot. But yeah, it's way out of
Yeah.
my wheelhouse, so I'm pretty useless to talk about this kind of stuff with.
Well, I mean, like, from what I've realized is that organisms that don't have as complex of features are slowly being realized to feel pain, or at least they have some sort of sentient experience. Like, um, certain responses from microorganisms, like my mentor did this paper on tobacco hornworms, and they were producing a painful response to a noxious stimuli, and they define it as pain like responses because we don't fully understand it. But when we get to the point where we do, I don't want to be under the impression that, oh my God, I didn't believe these organisms were alive or sentient for all this time, and now I'm suddenly having to define it as the philosophical form of sentience because now we have proof, if that makes sense.
I'm not entirely sure I know what point you're making. I mean, we could get like
Well,
new data and learn that something is sentient that we don't currently take to be sentient. Is that like kind of what you're saying?
yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, that could be the case. We just kind of have to go off of the information that we have. Like, I don't currently have a belief that, like, and again, I'm using sentience P. I don't have a belief that, like, a tree or, like, a flower or something like that is sentient. My basic understanding is that you have to have some kind of, like, brain, some kind of, like, more advanced, like, nervous system. And I'm just under the impression that, like, plants don't have that, little microscopic creatures don't have that. And I'm not really someone who is good, again, like it's just not my area. I just go off the consent. It's like if I start, like, you don't do physics, right? Like if I start talking to you about like various like astronomical phenomena, you'll be like, well, I trust the physicists. I assume there are such things as like black holes. I don't fucking know how that all works though. Like I'm kind of going off the consensus. That's like what you're going to get from me on a lot of science topics. I mean, except maybe in like computing, which is the area like I know a bit about. So yeah, sorry to be a bad
Yeah,
interlocutor. It's just not an area that I like know anything about really.
well, I mean, that's kind of what I've realized is that there's a lot of contradictions in science, and a lot of people go back and forth. Like, when I say there's a pain like response to something, there's so many people who go against that because it's not pain like how they imagine it. And the reason I hold the beliefs I do, like like the reason why I say a microorganism is sentient and like sentient B, um, is because we don't know that much about them. And there's so much things that we have yet to learn. Like I asked this one question to that mentor that did the tobacco hornworm experiment, and not even they could answer it, and they have a PhD in neuroscience.
Right.
So it's like it's it's all so unknown to me that until I know more, I can't write off an organism as
Yeah.
not sentient.
Well, sentient B. Well, again, I don't fully understand sentient B because I don't know the biology, but I mean, presumably when it comes to caring, well, trying to avoid going into the ethics. I mean, I guess I'll make one point. When it comes to caring about something, though, presumably you're going to care about sentience P, right? You're going to care if it's actually having the kind of subjective experience that is unpleasant. Like if you know that there is some physical process occurring, but there is no there, right? They don't have a mind. Like, would you actually care about that? I personally would not care about that.
Well, let's say like I the thing is that mind is so loosely defined because there's organisms that don't have a brain and they still have a mind.
I don't wait. I'm
Um,
not sure I grant that. I mean, maybe there's some like proto brain kind of thing, but let's just take like a clear cut case though. Like, I mean, you agree that you have a mind, right?
yeah, I agree that I have a mind.
I hope so. um, and
No, I'm
yeah,
sorry. I defined mind more biologically, where it's as in like nervous tissue, where
okay,
a
wait,
lot
wait.
of
There's
organisms.
confusion there. That's not how I'm using the term, just to be clear. By mind, I'm talking about a subjective experience. You know what it's like to, to see and to feel and to be hurt emotionally and these kind of like these are like subjective experiences. That this is like the
And
mind is the space that those subjective experiences happen in. That's what I'm talking about when I use mind in a sentence.
I guess I would be saying it in a similar way, but not completely. What I mean by subjective experience, I'm talking about like having a unique life or a unique, I guess, response to something.
Well,
Um,
I guess what I'm trying to say though is that say that you have something that has the physical process that you're concerned with, right? Maybe like there's some like tissue somewhere or something that we in a lab or something. Say that there's something that has the physical process that you care about, or that you were mentioning. Um, but say that we know that it has no mind. It has, and I mean mind is in a subjective experience. It doesn't have a first person point of view. Like, does that language make sense to you? Do you know what I mean when I say first person point of view? Or when I say like the space in which things like emotions and perception occur? Like, do you understand what I'm meaning when I say those things, or is it not clear?
yes, it does. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is like I don't know if a lot of these organisms that have the physical processes don't have a mind,
Okay, but
and
just what I'm trying to get at is just hypothetically though, say that we have something that has those physical processes but no mind. Like let's just say that we know that for whatever particular reason. You wouldn't care how that thing is treated, presumably, right? Like if we know that a brick is like having this kind of procedure or some physical process or something or just some piece of tissue, but we know that it has no mind. So I'm not asking like, do you actually know or something? Like maybe that's a question and we could explore that. I'm saying, say hypothetically that we know that there's no mind there. You're not going to care about it just because it has like pain B, right? It's pain P that you care about when it comes to actually determining how you want to treat something.
well, that's kind of saying like I.
You're breaking up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Am I
I
breaking
think
up
you're just
now?
far from your mic. Yeah, you're fine now. Sorry. Yeah, I was trying to get just my what I was asking about is say that the abstract version of the situation is just say that we know that something has pain B, but it does not have pain P. It doesn't even have sentience P. You're not going to care about that thing, surely, right?
That's where I wouldn't understand it because it's from what we know, every organism that has pain B has some form of pain P. Of course, it's not every one that we know
Mm-hmm.
has both, like we don't know for certain if it they have pain P, but we know they have pain B, and every organism that has pain B that we know has pain P has both of them. I'm not sure if you're following along, but
I'm following. You're saying it's like an induction. You're like pane P, as far as we can tell, the way to know if that's there is pane B there. Pane B is like strongly associated with this. But what I'm asking is,
like sorry, like in order to have pain P, you need pain B. And that's where I wouldn't know
what?
for certain because
Okay, well that I want
I
to ask about. When you say need, is that, are you saying it's logically impossible to have pane B but not pane P? Like there are views like that, but is that actually a view that you're taking?
don't believe that it's logic. Like I don't believe that it is logically possible to have philosophical pain without having some sort of remnants of pain B.
So to say it's logically impossible would be to say that there's a logical contradiction, right? That's what it means to say something
Oh,
is
sorry,
logically
not like
impossible.
that. Not like that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's possible to have pain P without biological some sort of something.
Well, when you say it's not possible, is that logical possibility?
Um, I I mean, I from what do we know in science, I guess it isn't logically possible
It's not. So
because
what
I
do you
don't think
think the
there's
contradiction would be though? If I give you a situation and I say organism this organism has pain B and it does not have sentience P. What do you think the logical contradiction is there?
well because it doesn't make sense in my mind that there's no I just
Don't confuse
then I would
absence of explanation with logical impossibility, right? There might be something like, you
then I
know,
would have to talk about what consciousness biologically is, and I can't define it biologically.
well, I don't know about that. It's just the thing I'm trying to show is that, and again, like we kind of wanted to not get into the ethics, so we can stop this if you want, but like the point I'm trying to make is that I suspect what you actually care about is sentience P, right? And I think that you're just probably just using like pain B and sentience B as like proxies for these things. And I think that the way to show that what you actually care about is sentience P is to take a hypothetical situation where something has sentience, or sorry, pain B, but does not have sentience P. Now you could object and to show in that situation you don't really care how the thing is treated. Now you could object to that move of me setting up a hypothetical like that by saying that hypothetical is logically impossible. But then I'll respond to that by asking what contradiction is entailed by the hypothetical. And if there's not one, then you shouldn't say it's logically impossible. And then if you're not saying it's logically impossible, we end up back at, well, would you care about the thing?
Well, I mean, so to have sentience P, the philosophical definition,
Mm-hmm.
you would have to have sentience P without sentience B, you would have to be a ghost. So I don't really believe in ghosts. So I couldn't say that there is such thing as an organism that has sentience B alone that on some scale doesn't have sentience P from what I know from all the organisms that have both of them, at least from based off of the majority of the population, not a single organism with sentience P doesn't have sentience B.
But we're not
So I
talking, I'll grant that for the sake of argument, and that may very well be true. I mean, I would assume it's probably true if you know your stuff about biology, which I'm guessing you do. But what I'm talking about is a thought experiment, right? And things are often, you figure them out by thinking about thought experiments. It's a very helpful tool. They get used in science too. Like, didn't Einstein figure out stuff about the speed of light by picturing hypothetical light moving between mirrors while the frame of reference containing the mirrors is moving too. Like there's stuff like this in philosophy, right? So I don't agree you would have to be a ghost because again, it's like what's the contradiction in saying there exists some entity hypothetically which is not a ghost, which and that's not even important. Let's say who cares? Let's just say it is a ghost. Say that there is a ghost and say that it does not have pain B, but it does have sentience. Oh, I was doing it the other way earlier, right? Was I doing it the other way? I was doing it does
Yeah.
right. So it
Well,
well, I was doing something that does have pain B. So a ghost doesn't work for that. But just picture hypothetically, right? I'm not saying this thing actually exists. Just picture hypothetically, there is something that has pain B, but it doesn't have sentience P. Would you not care about that thing, or are you saying that that's logically impossible?
well, let me quickly just read out what my like definition for sentience be is because I think that there's a little bit of did you ever hear what my definition for that was? I'm not sure if you have.
For sentience, I don't remember it precisely. I did hear you speak it in the debate. I couldn't repeat it though.
Gotcha. So from what I have for biology's perspective is
Mm-hmm.
actively perceiving via neurological signaling, we'll say it like that, environmental information and making cognitive decisions. So then based off of that neurological signal, another neurological signal is firing to change the course of that organism to make some sort of decision for survival. And we see this with microorganisms, plants changing direction in growth. And that's where I'm defining sentience be.
Well,
And it's in response to survive.
I heard the word perceive in there, but is that perceive just talking about sentience P inside of sentience B? Like, is sentience B like a superset of sentience P? Because the way I thought you were talking about it was that it's a completely separable thing. It's this chemical process, but I heard the word perception come up in there. Is that perception, perception P, or perception B?
It's like a chain of chemical reactions, is what I'm kind of getting at.
Right.
I'm having trouble like defining it because it's not exactly in order to define sentience P and separate the two, I would have to know the biological concept behind consciousness, which I don't know. And that's I can't separate the two without that. If
Yeah.
that I Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah. I mean, let again, I'm not going to know the biological details, but let's just call that, whatever that chemical process is, that's pain B, whatever exactly it is. So do you think it's logically impossible for there to exist a thing which does not have pain B, sorry, which has pain B but does not have sentience P?
Um Based off of what we know to an extent, yes.
No, no, but not when you say based off of what we know. I'm talking about when I say is it logically possible, what I'm that's equivalent to asking is there a logical contradiction? So when I say the following sentence, is there a logical contradiction entailed by it? This organism
Um
has pain B but does not have sentience P.
the thing is I couldn't give you a straight answer. Is I can't say no or yes because I don't like that's the issue is I don't know everything about like every as far as we know, we don't know everything about like a plant or a microorganism. We don't know everything about them.
Well, so it
So I
would
can't
be it would be fair to say that
know.
you don't currently hold the belief, right? You don't hold a belief that there is a contradiction there, right? Like with God, you might not believe that God exists. You might not believe God doesn't exist. You might just be agnostic. It sounds like you're saying you're agnostic about the logical possibility of something having pain B and not sentience P.
I guess so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just no.
So but then if you're agnostic about it, then just think about the hypothetical though. So just say there was a thing like that, right? would you care about it? It's got some chemical process, but it has no subjective experience in the philosophical sense. It's not got a mind. It doesn't feel any pain. It doesn't have any emotions. None of that exists in it. Kicking it is no different than kicking a rock from its point of view because it doesn't have a point of view.
Then, yeah, I mean, hypothetically, yeah.
Yeah, as in, yeah, you wouldn't care, which is my view
No,
also.
yeah, hypothetically, I wouldn't care.
Yeah, so what that shows, it doesn't show that you're wrong about there being like a tight correlation between pain B and pain P or sentience B and sentience P. It doesn't show any of that, but it just shows that when we go to this really abstract level, what you actually care about is sentience P, right? Which makes sense. I think that's what most people care about. Um, we care about the actual feelings and experiences of other beings. Now, I mean, we don't have
No,
to go. Pardon me.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, I guess we did kind of go into the ethics. I guess this is like sort of in between being about the ethics and being about like metaphysics of mind stuff. My doctor buddy did respond though. You want to talk to him for a few minutes before we call it because he will respond to you about the starfish stuff.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna invite him into this conversation. He's a nice guy. Do you know Avi? Have you? No. Sorry, I didn't realize that it would cut us off like that. I should know my
Oh, you're all
Discord better. I'm sure he'll hop in a minute. He's probably just away from his computer. If he doesn't show up in like 5 or something, we can just call it. Um,
I am really curious to know because there are like, as I said, from what I, from the professionals I've spoken to, they seem to agree with me on the opinion on ethics, or sorry, not ethics, on like sentience B, I guess, and like whether or not starfish feel pain or like the pain-like experience sort of thing that's been defined for things that we don't understand. Um,
you're
but I mean, it's
sorry. I
go
thought you were
ahead.
no, no. I thought you were done. You go ahead.
Oh, I was just like, it's the whole reason like why I don't um the whole reason behind why I try to care about all life to an equal extent, I guess, where it's as best as I can, of course. Um, because I just don't know everything yet. Like there was this one question. I'll even ask him about it. But it's basically this one problem in bacterial science. I know it might sound like boring, but basically there's this fertility factor in bacteria that gets transferred to another bacterium. And only if that bacterium does not have the fertility factor can it accept another one. But if you put all bacterium with fertility factors together in a petri dish, somehow some of them know that there is no bacterium without the fertility factor. So, despite the fact that it's naturally not, I guess, it's not in favor of their survival, they will release their fertility factor just randomly, just so they can accept another bacterium's fertility factor to reproduce.
And so, what are you sort of getting at from there, or wondering about?
Is how do the bacteria know that they're in a petri dish with no other bacterium
Oh,
with fertility factor?
oh, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question. That's something I have absolutely no idea about, but that is an interesting question, though. Certainly.
Yeah, so it's like stuff like this and like how we discovered chemotaxis and different mechanisms in very, very small microorganisms that I how am I supposed to know whether or not that organism has a subjective experience when the only way I can see it is through a microscope?
How are you supposed to know if something has a well, I think that the basic thing that people are gonna want to argue is that we know that we have certain brain structures that are correlated with our subjective experience. And okay, I guess I'll bring Avi up to date, but I'll just say this basic point. What people are going to want to say is that we know these brain structures are correlated with subjective experiences, and we know that these brain structures are present in certain other beings, like pigs or cows or chickens. but we don't see those things in, like single cells or something like this. And so there's just no reason to hold that belief in the case of single cells. You might be agnostic about it, but yeah. I'll bring Avi up to date. So yeah, we had a pretty productive conversation here. You can refer to her as Snitch. So we reached agreement about all the contradiction stuff and about like linguistic realism, though I wasn't like using that term when I was speaking with her about it. And about when vegans tease out entailments of your views and they say you hold this like evil view about Hitler or something. A wise vegan might actually, when they say something like that, really be saying not that you actually hold that belief, but that it's an entailment of your view. And in fact, the very idea, the whole idea is that you'll be appalled by it and not want to hold it. And since it's logically connected to the views you do hold, you'll reject those other views. So yeah, we went through all that. We seem to agree about all that, and then we just sort of started having this like after conversation, and it's been a bit all over the place. But um, I guess that what Snitch is trying to resolve is like what basis we have for believing that beings are sentient. And I just, as you walked in, I laid out like the basic kind of case, but you actually know the relevant like neurobiology and stuff. So, I mean, you could probably speak to that, and then I'm sure she'll have something to ask about it, and you could like clarify that.
Sure. Okay. My basic case is just that. Well, first of all, first off, it's important to just acknowledge that it's a case. That's what it is. It's a case. It's not something that's going to be an answer to any kind of ultimate solipsism. So nothing I'm going to offer is going to be impervious to someone saying, "Oh, but maybe they're still not sentient,"
She's
or
closer on
something.
the panpsychism side than the solipsism side, for the
Oh,
record. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, no, it's also not going to be, yeah, it's also not going to be impervious to the other silly view, which is panpsychism. And by panpsychism, I take it that's the minority view among today's self-described panpsychists, which is the view that all things are sentient.
Well, she hasn't
Most,
actually assented to that, but she's kind of, as far as I can tell, like pretty agnostic about the sentient. Like, she's closer to that end of the scale than the
yeah,
solipsist end of the scale. Is all I was saying.
by the way, that's a fringe. Just so you know, that's a fringe view, even among those who call themselves panpsychists. Um, Among those who call themselves panpsychists, it's really not taken to mean that. That's like a very fringe view among panpsychists. It's special, and panpsychism itself is a fringe view. So it's the fringe of the fringe. But anyway, um, yeah. So the different. I mean, so at minimum, what I can say is that there's certainly a lot more of a case to say that animals are sentient than things like plants or single-celled organisms or whatnot. Um, and there's and well, it requires some starting assumptions. The first starting assumption is that you're sentient, um, and that your sentience is being generated from your brain. And so once we accept that, even if we accept things like I'm sentient, and the other people are sentient, and they're coming from their brains too, then we can make certain inferences. So one inference is that there are certain types of analogous structures that appear to be important for generating sentience, such as the central nervous system, which is present in animals and not plants. This is not to say that it's impossible for plants to not have formed some other way of doing it, but it's just going to be more expected on the hypothesis given our starting assumptions that of what almost everyone has in the background assumptions, like, that we are sentient. Other things are certain behaviors. There are certain behaviors of we recognize there are certain behaviors of people when they're sentient versus when they're not sentient. So, for example, talking and saying the words "I am sentient." Most people who say "I am sentient" are not going to do that if they're not sentient. Usually, it's possible, but usually not. Or reacting to pain in a very like agonizing manner, like screaming, running away from pain, like those sorts of behaviors. These are, um, or crying, like emotional, like crying during the loss of like a loved one. I mean, these are things that animals exhibit, and Plants really don't. I mean, unless we really stretch it to like certain behaviors that plants do, but like very slow type responses, but that don't really involve much locomotion. They don't really involve that to nearly the same degree. So there's certainly more of a case that animals are sentient than plants are sentient. The other thing I'll mention is that if plants are sentient, it would just be more of a case for veganism. It's like if you have the goal of staying alive and plants are sentient, you'll almost certainly harm less plants by being vegan than by eating animals. So
I made
it
her. I
certainly
made her a
wouldn't.
promise not to go down the ethical road for this combo. So we'll
Oh,
try to steer clear of it for now.
oh, sure.
We might
Yeah,
do a
I'm
follow
just
up
the
though.
reason why that's brought up. Yeah, the reason why I'm just saying the reason why that's brought up is almost like, oh well, you're eating plants, you're doing bad. Like, well, no, like that's not. That wouldn't be a reason. It would just if plants are sentient and the concern is over sentient, it's just like that's not a reason for non-veganism. But anyway, all right, cool.
Uh, that's where I have like questions about like I know that there have been certain organisms that in recent years, in the recent past decades, they weren't thought to be sentient for the longest of time. For example, octopi, starfish. I'm not sure if you think starfish are sentient or not, but I've seen evidence of them feeling at least pain-like responses. I know that's also a term that's used in science with like, for example, tobacco hornworms. Um, would you like how do you how do you I guess with so much new science coming out, I know you said that it's like a case and that case is pretty much unsolvable considering it's science and there's always something new to be found. Um, given that case, I guess how do I word this question? For I guess organisms without brains and they still are considered sentient. What do you think about that?
Well, in terms of octopus and starfish, I have a very different credence about octopus being sentient versus starfish being sentient. There's a lot more, and it's again, which goes back to the same things I mentioned earlier, the same criteria. So not just behavior, but also analogous structures. In the case of octopi, octopi have both the analogous structures. They have a central nervous system, and they exhibit behavior that's far more. I'll add behavior that's far more complex than starfish. In the case of starfish, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I totally agree.
Yeah. In the case of starfish, there are certain behaviors that one expects, that one exhibits, but it doesn't really seem that far different than um, other types of animals that don't have central nervous systems that have some locomotion. I'm a lot less convinced of starfish sentience. They don't have the analogous structures, where in the case of octopi they do, and the behavioral complexity matches that. So I don't know about starfish.
Gotcha. So it's mainly just about having like analogous structures.
Well, no, it's about two things. It's about analogous structures and similar behavior to people who are sentient.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from, at least from that aspect. Um, yeah, I hold the belief that so just out of curiosity, like this is just something that came up, at least with the conversation with Nick, and considering you are a scientist, what do you have an opinion on like carnivorous animals, if you guys have any?
You mean like like
Avi is the guy who Richard's view originates with, so get
oh
ready
yeah,
for
like
that.
all the people who are like kill auto order predators, they got that idea from me. So
Oh boy.
yeah,
So why?
And hey, do I
well,
technically count as a scientist now? Like a computer scientist? Is that a thing? Do I get to say that?
yeah.
I,
I mean, it's for the very same. Why would well? It's for the similar reason that if I saw like some vampire, humanoid predatoring, like engaging in predation on like some mentally handicapped human baby, I would kill the vampire. Um, so it's like you have a you have a you have an animal that's going to brutally kill, murder, torture, like, well, maybe not murder, but engage in something that's going to end in a horrifically tortuous death for some other being that's going to almost certainly live the vast majority of its life just eating plants. And so, in any other context, like certainly in the human context, I would not put up with that. I'm not sure why I wouldn't put up with that in the animal context. Like, why would we want a world where animals just are free to go around and torture other animals to death?
So, with that being said, I'm just curious, like, what happens if science advances to the point that we learn everything there is to know about plants and microorganisms and that they do have a level of sentience? It's just chemically different from what we know, but it's still the same. We still would consider them to have a mind. What happens if we get to that point?
Okay, I want to just cut in for a sec, just because I don't want to get shit for this later. You are totally initiating an ethical conversation right now. So like you are fine with going down that road. It's not going to be later like, oh, they like sprung the like ethical thing on me or something like that.
I honestly, if we could just, you guys could ask me like a question, I guess, if you want on ethics. I just one question back and forth, and then we can be done because it's been a while.
I didn't really have a whole lot of questions. I'm happy to answer your questions. It's just that I think Isaac's concern is that, look, I'm not privy to the conversations you and Isaac had before I came in, but it seems like there was some agreement that ethics wouldn't be discussed, and I think he's just concerned that since you seem to be asking questions that are ethics discussed, in order for me to answer it, we would be discussing ethics, and he just wants to flag that and make sure that you're agreeing to that.
Oh yeah, no, I'm okay with that. Just
Okay.
if it would be a quick discussion, I'm not
Yeah,
trying to stay here all night.
no, we have no problem talking about it. We've been doing the whole debate, philosophy, YouTube shit for like a lot of years, and just you seem like nice enough, and it seems like this is gonna like be fine. But sometimes you get this situation where you make an agreement at the outset, and then it ends up not being honored in the debate because things are going fine. Then they go south. Then after the fact, the person says that you were full of shit and you lied about how you wouldn't talk about this. So I'm just making sure that doesn't, even though it seems really low probability because everything's been pretty smooth, I'm just like making sure that's not the case. Like you're starting to talk about ethics, that's totally fine. We're happy to talk about it, but just making you aware that that's happening. And if you're fine with that, then that's fine.
I'm fine with discussing it. If it would be all right, let's just not fight about it. But yeah,
I'm
I'm
happy.
okay with
Yeah. So what would happen in a situation like that if technology advanced and we did discover some level of sentience on plants and some single-cellular organisms and whatnot? Then yeah, I would grant some degree of moral consideration to them. The degree of which moral consideration I would grant to them may not be very much, though, depending on their degree of sentience. So it may still be a very trivial amount of moral consideration that really wouldn't change much. And of course, to whatever degree it would change, it would just motivate me to be to stay vegan even more than I already am. Because if I were not to be vegan, then I would be killing even more, not only the animals, but also even more plants. So that's what would happen.
Gotcha. I understand. And um, if you were to get to that point, would your view on herbivores and carnivores ever like shift in any direction? If, for example, let's say we figure out a new chemical pathway where plants are almost equal to like an herbivorous, oh my god, to an herbivore.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, so what it would change, assuming, so it may not change if the degree of sentience is just trivial. Then I would just probably just continue treating the herbivores as herbivores instead of primary carnivores. But if that weren't the case, if we discovered some non-trivial, like or substantial degree of sentience, then it wouldn't change my view on killing. I would just label them predators. They're just killing individual plants, and then I would just advocate shooting the herbivores, and it would just shift the order. So I would, instead of killing the predator that eats the herbivore that eats the plant, and the predator that eats the predator that eats the predator that eats the herbivore that eats the plant, and sparing the predator that eats the predator that eats the herbivore that eats the plant. What I would do is the order would just be shifted. It would be like killing even order predators instead of odd order predators. Because the initial victim is changed now. The initial victim is going to be the plants instead of the herbivores.
Gotcha. So yeah, okay. So it seems like the logic is pretty consistent there. I just think I guess I hold a different belief than you. But that's yeah, that seems pretty logically consistent then.
Okay.
That was pretty chill.
Okay, well, if you want to fight about ethics, we can definitely do that sometime. I don't even think I'd want to tonight because now I'm a little tired and I should probably go to bed. I have school in the morning. But yeah, I mean, you have us on DM me, DM Avi. We'll be happy to have a big fight about veganism.
All right, I'll be open to that. I mean, I don't know if I want to have a fight, but I'll have a discussion with you guys because you guys seem pretty chill and honestly, best interaction so far. Um, yeah, I learned a lot about logic, which was kind of cool, and I'm really glad to meet you guys.
If you want to talk about bodybuilding, do that too.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I will say just because Richard also very nice guy, very friendly, but he's an acquired taste, and if you get him into a bad mood with you, you might really dislike him. But we both are pretty close with Richard and like him a lot, so I wouldn't write Richard off too fast, even though you've had some like highly heated engagements. But yeah, good conversation though, and you can contact us if you want to talk more.
All right. Well, I hope you have guys have. Oh my dear Lord, my English. I hope you guys have a wonderful night.
Yeah, you too. All right, have a good one.
As well.
Bye.